Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Coffee Break. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the editorial director of PR Week. Going to talk today to Matt Middleman, or should I say Dr. Matt Middleman, who is the founder and CEO of LifeSci Communications. And Matt, you are a very interesting agency because you're stuffed full of doctors and scientists. So tell us the story of how you got started. It was about 4 years ago, I think, with LifeSci Communications and what you specialize in.
It'll actually be 5 years in January. But first, Steve, thanks for having me on the show. I'm a big fan, and I'm honored to share the stage, or the microphone, if you will, with a lot of really impressive colleagues. But we founded the agency. It was January of 2017, so it'll be 5 years this winter. And it started off with one employee, me, and an idea to be better at helping biopharma, healthcare, biotech companies communicate with audiences externally. And the idea was that the more we could understand the science and the medicine of the work these companies are doing, the better we can be at helping these companies communicate, to turn ourselves into strategic partners as opposed to just executors. And over the course of the first year of our existence, it was about seeing that model through and hiring more folks like me. My background is a physician and scientist, and hire other PhDs and physicians, but also fill out the team with folks with long backgrounds in different areas of healthcare communications. And, if you ask me what the real special sauce is, yeah, it's special that we have almost 20 MDs and PhDs are part of our team. But the special sauce is how those folks interact with the folks that work with our clients on a day-to-day basis that comes from communications backgrounds.
Yes, you've got about 65 employees, I think, in total. How do the scientists and the doctors work? I mean, are they out there on the front line doing, media relations, social stuff, or are they more doing high-level strategic counsel? How does it work with sort of getting them into the mix with the more sort of traditional practitioners who maybe came up through a pure PR background?
Right. It's a good question, because we went with a different approach, I think, than other agencies who work in healthcare, because I don't think it's unusual for some of the healthcare agencies to have a handful of PhDs that are part of their team. But generally, they're used as consultants, kind of parachute in and out of programs when technical support is needed. For us, we wanted to train the folks that came out of academia to be communications experts in their own right. So it's more the former of what you described, whereas the physicians and scientists are on the front lines, on the account teams, working with our clients on a day-to-day basis. Now, does it take some extra time to train these folks to not only be scientists, but to be PR experts? Yes, but in the end, you have a set of specialties on both sides that's really unique.
Yeah, it's a bit like our holding company, Haymarket, actually has a very big medical division, and we have a lot of doctors and academics who are journalists. So it's interesting to see how different functions come into play. And you're right, mainstream PR companies do have people from all sorts of backgrounds, like chefs. It's amazing to see the different types of people who are now involved in PR, and a real sign of the growth of the industry. You've had great growth this year, particularly. I think you were up 60%. I guess is that partly due to COVID-19? And talk to us a bit about how the business, going back to the start of the pandemic, how did the business change then? And did you get a much bigger demand for your services?
Yeah, well, in the 5 years since our founding, I don't know, we grew like 300%, and then 100%, and then 80%. And, it gets harder to keep making those percentages.
It does, yeah.
But, the amount that grew this year, how much is a reflection of the pandemic? I don't really know. But what we do know is that the biopharma, the biotech industry in some way saved the world from this pandemic. So I think the interest, the investment in our industry was quite dramatic over the last 18 months. And certainly we as an agency benefited from all of that interest and investment. So we've grown throughout the pandemic, and we're lucky to be able to say that. But we were in the right place, focused on the right industry at the right time. And of course, the way that we worked changed somewhat in that our headquarters is in New York City. And for most of our life, our short life, we were together in our New York City headquarters. And when the pandemic hit, we went completely virtual like everyone else. But the work that we did was consistent. It stayed to that high level of execution that we always expected, even when we were together. So we really didn't miss a beat when we went virtual. But what did change is it gave us the ability to now think about recruiting folks that could work virtually from the beginning. So it increased our potential talent pool quite dramatically. And we hired a lot of people in the last 18 months, I don't know, 20 or 30 or something. And each one is better than the next. So we've had a good 18 months.
Yeah, tell us about some of the work you've been doing, that really illustrates the DNA of LifeSci comms, science-based stuff, which has been top of mind over the last couple of years. Give us a sort of practical insight into some of the work you've done you're most proud of.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of, or many of our clients are what I consider emerging biotech companies. It's Moderna. Before anybody heard of Moderna, was an emerging biotech company. And many of these companies are doing highly sophisticated, cutting edge work. I mean, right on the edge of where science and medicine is and where it's going. We also work with big pharma companies and mid-sized pharma companies across a wide spectrum of capabilities and scopes. But when I think about things that get me excited every day to come into work, one of our newest clients comes to mind, and they're in a space newly defined as precision psychiatry. And for a long time, psychiatry's been a space where the physicians and the practitioners are operating more as if it was an art than a science, because there's no real markers by which to measure which therapies work and how well they're working and so on. And so one of these new biotech companies we're working with spent about 15 or 20 years researching biomarkers to be able to judge psychiatric medicines and how they are functioning and helping their patients in a really precise way. And this company's right at the cutting edge of that new space. So it's exciting to work with companies like that.
Yeah, well, tell us about some of the other innovations. We see all sorts of interesting startups and ideas in AI, in 3D printing, in telehealth, in apps and mobile-based healthcare. How do you see the whole world developing? Because a lot of those things have been sped up over the last 18 months as well, especially telehealth with the pandemic.
Yeah, I think for a long time there was the biotech world, in Boston and Cambridge and San Francisco, and then there was the tech world, Silicon Valley and so on. And there were instances where the two came together, but in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a real acceleration of bringing tech innovation together with biomedical innovation. And you see that in many of the clients we work with on the biotech side are utilizing AI in some way or another in the course of their drug development and research and development processes. And then we also work with clients that are in this health tech kind of space where we work with a company that's developing an app to support psychiatrists to collect real world data from their patients. So we're seeing a lot of that.
And how do you, science has been in the news. It's such a sort of febrile atmosphere, isn't it? That science has almost become political over the last couple of years with, attitudes to vaccines, attitudes to social distancing, safety, mask wearing, and all the rest of it. How have you managed to cut through the misinformation and what are the big issues for you in that area that you've been helping your clients out with?
The companies we work with are basically developing new medicines to treat diseases. And generally, that space is pretty separated from political aspects. And because the process of drug development can take 10, 20 years, cost billions of dollars. And in that period of time, politicians come and go, policies come and go. And so the work doesn't really change. Our work, the companies that we work with, their work doesn't change. So, thankfully, we haven't been too affected by any dramatic changes on the policy or political side.
Sometimes we underestimate what's been achieved over the last couple of years, don't we? The speed at which the vaccines came to market and got through the approval stages, and we're seeing the pills, the next phase, the boosters, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that this is going to change that, what you talked about, the number of years it takes to develop drugs? Is this going to be a kind of a new world where people will say, well, why do we have to take so long? We've got to be safe, obviously, always, but we can actually push these things through faster if we take on some of the lessons we learned in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the process of developing a new drug takes decades and billions of dollars. And in a world where we're concerned about the cost of drugs going forward, anything we can do to make that process more efficient, shorter, and so on could end up reducing the cost of the drug at the end of the day. And there's many companies trying to innovate on that front, whether it's being able to run clinical trials more efficiently, find patients to enroll in those clinical trials, the trials where the effectiveness of these drugs are tested in a more efficient way and in a more inclusive way. So I think all of that will lend to that greater efficiency.
So you're sort of moving into this sort of mid-sized agencies area. How do you plan to evolve the firm to keep that special sauce, if you like, that scientific basis, but scaling it up as well? And are you going to go back into a physical office? There's a lot of debate at the moment about mandated hybrid environments, non-mandated. How are we going to work in the future? Just talk to us a bit about that from your agency point of view.
Yeah, well, we grew so much during the pandemic. We actually grew out of our physical office over the last about 12 months, and we're in the process of securing and building out the new space as we speak. When that's ready, we look forward to having folks back together. Again, we operated seamlessly in the remote world, but there's benefits to having a free flow of ideas with folks being together as well. And so I think once we are situated in the new office, it'll be a permanently hybrid situation.
And when you're running your own independent shop, everybody starts thinking about, I don't know if you've started getting approaches yet from holding companies. We've seen a lot of heat in the M&A market. Is that something you're looking at, or are you just concentrating on building in a business at the moment and those things will come along later? Yeah,
we have gotten approached a couple of times. When you have a unique model and the tremendous amount of growth that we've had, you don't go unnoticed, but not interested in that right now. We still think we're at the, right at the beginning of that hockey stick kind of growth. We're just thinking about where we're going to be in the next 2, 3, 5 years and not worried about any of those other things right now.
And just to finish up, give us an example of a doctor or a scientist doing PR where they brought something totally unique and really changed the dynamic or the paradigm, if you like, and really sort of illustrated why it's important to have experts involved in certain areas of communication.
I can give an example based on the makeup of our media relations team, actually. Our media relations department is led by a former broadcast news journalist. We have a print journalist on that team and a PhD scientist. And so you can imagine why that team is really great at translating high science and medical stories into a form that's going to resonate with journalists. And that model for the media team is the same that illustrates how effective the team is at all the other aspects to communications, whether it's social media or creative or digital tools and messaging. Once these folks that come out of academia, the scientists and physicians, they are so smart. And once they pick up and understand how to be professional communicators, they're just incredible at doing this work and thinking outside the box and coming up with new ideas. So it's really a powerful model.
Well, it was good to find out more about the agency, Matt. We wish you continued success. And thanks for joining us on Coffee Break.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure.